This episode of Matt's Mysteries contains material that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Halloween episode of Matt's Mysteries. Instead of the usual format, where I ramble about one mystery for math amount of minutes, and to stay true to the spirit of Halloween, I'll be going through 3 separate mysteries that focus on all things supernatural, paranormal, and give me the heebie-jeebies. It's ghost stories. I'm telling you ghost stories. Anyway, these are real mysteries that happened to real people. With that said, my retelling of these stories will be a tad shorter than usual, because I wanted to pack as much mystery into the best holiday ever as possible. If you're familiar with the standard Matt's Mysteries format, you'd know that I normally spend the latter portion of a video going through theories, as well as sharing my thoughts on the case with you. I won't be doing that today, and will instead be locking Professor Buzzkill in the sewer drain in the back of my mind, in an attempt at keeping the spooky nature of these stories intact. Either way, I hope you enjoy the video. If you like this kind of format, where I talk about multiple mysteries in a slightly condensed way, let me know in the comments. If this episode is well received, and you'd like more of this style of content, I'll start dropping videos like this here and there going forward. Anyway, enough rambling. Time to tell you the first story. Story 1. The Mann Family Haunting. If you ever find yourself wandering through Lake Wales, located merely 55 miles southwest of Orlando, Florida, there's a particular house that you should probably avoid. On the surface, it seems like an ordinary 1-story, 2-bedroom house, blending in with its neighbors. However, as the saying goes, appearances can often be deceiving. In the fall of 1991, this seemingly typical house was home to 19-year-old Alan Mann, as well as his parents, Sandra and David. Alan worked the night shift, which often left him home alone during the day. Or at least, he thought he was alone. On a seemingly normal afternoon, after having the luxury of an unexpected day off, Alan returned home.
I had the afternoon off. I'd come home and I guess it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd finally gotten some sleep.
Feeling rested, he settled into the quiet atmosphere of his home, when suddenly, he was jolted by what appeared to be the silhouette of a mysterious woman.
The figure turned away from the door like it was leaving, and by the time I got up and walked 3 paces to the door, I don't know what happened. It just turned the corner and disappeared.
Alan searched every inch of the house, convinced he had just encountered a ghost. Or, at the very least, something he couldn't quite explain. Even though he had securely locked the doors from the inside, the woman was nowhere to be found. Eventually, he confided in his mother, sharing his experience with the spectral sighting. However, she dismissed his claims outright, refusing to believe him. Alan's eerie experience would be left unresolved until he married his then-girlfriend, Linda, who eventually moved into the house shortly after they tied the knot. Not long after Linda became a part of the family, something rather unsettling happened. One evening, while Sandra was watching TV with her new daughter-in-law, she experienced something that would shake her skepticism to its core, leaving her to question if there was more to what Alan had said than what she initially believed.
I had my little dog Prince beside me, and he was on a pillow. And I looked down at the end of the couch, and I saw this white, smoky thing. And the first thing I thought was fire. And by that time, the dog had gotten up on his feet, and then it just disappeared. And when Prince came back, I said, "Prince, we've got company."
In addition to a possible haunting, it seemed as though the Mann family was also doing catchphrases. Anyway, these strange occurrences were just the beginning. The family soon found themselves faced with inexplicable phenomena, including a gas lantern that randomly erupted into flames. Although Linda hadn't witnessed any apparitions herself, she became convinced that the house was indeed haunted. Eager to uncover the truth, Linda decided to consult a friend who owned a Ouija board. Now, I've never personally used a Ouija board, but from the amount of stories I've listened to where bad things happen when one is used, and because I've watched movies, not that one, I would argue that this was probably a bad idea.
The board talked real good with me. I believed in it. I've believed in that kind of stuff for a while, but I never came across it until then.
During their session, the board spelled out the name Kramer, which was all the proof Linda and Alan needed. Through the string of unexplained experiences to now allegedly contacting something beyond the veil, they felt certain they were sharing their home with a spirit, and her name was Kramer. Alan's father was not so easily persuaded.
I thought I was living with a bunch of flakes. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. If it was a paranormal experience or something like that, I didn't want to have to worry about that. I didn't want to admit it.
Personally, I don't think that's how you use the word flakes, but I also don't speak English so good, so what do I know? Anyway, despite David's skepticism, Alan and Linda were convinced of the ghostly presence and the influence she had in their home. However, what they weren't prepared for was a shocking turn of events that would turn their lives upside down. One evening, Alan was in their bedroom when Linda unexpectedly and violently lashed out at him.
All of a sudden, she just snapped, and she got this weird look. She pretty much attacked me. She was laughing. She had some weird laugh I'd never heard. It didn't even sound like her. She had this squeaky little giggle, and this was almost an evil laugh.
In that moment, Linda seemed to lose herself completely, holding Alan down with surprising strength.
I tried to get away, and it made her get more violent, and she started putting more force on my arms. So I pushed against her, and I slammed her against the wall 3 times, and she released me, and she put her head on my shoulder again and started talking and picked up the conversation exactly where she left off before she snapped.
What was even more unsettling was that Linda had absolutely no memory of this bizarre episode and how violent she had been with her husband. She protested by saying,
"That's not me. I don't have an evil laugh. I don't do the things he says I do. That's just not my type. I'm not that type of person. I just don't remember."
Regardless, it was clear that the ghost that had once seemed benign and more mischievous than anything, outside of allegedly setting fires, had transformed into something far more sinister. Was it simply an angry, restless spirit? Or was it something more demonic and malevolent in nature? Either way, even David began to take notice of the alarming changes taking place in his home.
I really got concerned. At that point, I said, look, I'm gonna get some help. Somebody, somewhere, can tell me what the heck is going on.
In an attempt to restore peace to their home and ward off any malevolent forces within, the family turned to a spiritualist for guidance. They were advised to pour salt around the house for protection. If that sounds familiar to you, you might remember the episode of Matt's Mysteries where we looked at the mysterious death of Christopher Case. And in doing so, you'll also likely remember that in occult rituals, salt is seen as containing properties used in creating protective barriers and will ward off any negative energy and evil spirits. Anyway, with that little refresher out of the way, the family followed the spiritualist's advice, and they placed bags of salt under their beds. Get this, they even attempted a DIY makeshift exorcism. I didn't know you could do those. Despite these efforts, Sandra reported that nothing seemed to alleviate the paranormal disturbances.
Every time we tried something, it would settle down, and then it would be stronger. There'd be more happenings.
Feeling increasingly desperate, they called in professionals equipped to handle paranormal investigations. As these professionals delved deeper into the mysteries of the house, the atmosphere continued to shift, becoming even more foreboding. A strange odor would pollute the rooms, and the entire family began experiencing debilitating headaches. Certain areas of the house even felt inexplicably, bone-chillingly cold. And then, as if these paranormal happenings were rapidly approaching their peak, the voices began to emerge. Sandra would go on to say,
What we heard was like a whole mass of voices, dull, muttering, and one woman's voice over the top of them. But yet, you could not distinguish anything they were saying.
Despite their growing fears, David and Sarah attempted to keep some level of calm, which shows a certain level of strength and resilience in the face of the unknown, something I don't think I'd be able to do. However, in spite of this, David was finding it increasingly difficult to dismiss what was happening to him, his family, and their house.
I stopped right in the middle of the hall. I caught the smell again, and I didn't have any explanation for... It's like you get an idea. Little voice inside your head. Like your conscience or whatever it is. That little voice that you listen to. It said, "This is Isabella."
My inner voice is Patrick Stewart. But who was Isabella? With the haunting and paranormal experiences intensifying, Linda was understandably spooked. It was then that she and Alan came to the conclusion that they could no longer stay in the house and opted to move out on their own. News of the Mann family's unsettling experiences soon reached the Center for Paranormal Studies, located in Silver Springs, Florida. The three founders of this collective made the journey to the Mann household, arriving with an arsenal of electronic equipment ready to investigate the phenomena at play. Among the parapsychologists was a man named Andrew Nichols, who took note of the atmosphere within the house, stating,
It definitely had an oppressive ambience to it, almost a depressive type of feeling. After being in the house for several hours, we all began to experience headaches.
Andrew then discovered that the bedroom Linda and Alan had shared while living in the house was the epicenter of the paranormal activity.
It was very, very high, so I thought it'd be a good idea to start taking a series of photographs at that point.
Andrew snapped 2 Polaroid photos, one during a peak of activity and another after. While the second image appeared completely normal, the first revealed something both intriguing and kinda chilling. There was a vague humanoid shape in the forefront of the picture.
It may be a reflection of some unusual environmental effect. It may be a strange artifact of the human psyche. Or it may be contact with a dimension of existence that's beyond our imagination.
After 2 months of ongoing disturbances, a local minister was finally called and visited the house. Shortly after their departure, the paranormal activity seemed to subside. However, David and Sandra had enough and ultimately made the decision to move out. Why they didn't do this earlier goes beyond my expertise as a pretend detective, although it stands to reason that they may have been unable to sell the property, uproot their lives, buy a new property, and move into said property in a timely fashion. It's one of the things that tends to happen a lot in both horror media as well as allegedly true stories involving the paranormal. And I'd wager that's one of the more likely reasons behind Sandra and David deciding to soldier through the paranormal onslaught. Anyway, despite a lack of historical evidence to suggest that an individual named Isabella Kramer ever lived in the area, the Mann family felt that they had all the proof they needed to validate their unsettling experiences. With all of that said, do you think the Lake Wales residence was truly haunted? And do you think the Mann family truly experienced the chilling paranormal events within? Story 2: The Black Hope Curse. Nestled just outside of Houston, Texas, lies a suburban neighborhood characterized by its elegant homes and perfectly trimmed lawns. In the early 1980s, a couple named Sam and Judith Haney made their home in this picturesque area, settling at the westernmost edge of the development. Sam described the residence as a culmination of their dreams.
When we bought the house in Newport, it was the house that we had always been looking for. So, it was the house that we intended to stay at for a long period of time.
Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life and new home lurked a dark and unsettling secret. And this revelation soon transformed their ideal home into a source of unending torment. It all began when an elderly man unexpectedly appeared at their door, bearing a foreboding message.
This elderly man told me that he had noticed that we were putting a swimming pool in our backyard, and that there was something about our backyard that I needed to know about. So I followed him around to my backyard, and he pointed at the ground and said that there are some graves right here, and he marked a spot on the ground where they were. And I really didn't know how to react to that. I didn't know if he was just joking. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to joke about something like that.
Intrigued and somewhat alarmed by this strange encounter, Sam decided to investigate the man's unsettling claims a little bit further. Using a backhoe, he began to dig, and before long, he made a shocking discovery, one that would change the course of his life forever.
And at that point, we stopped with the backhoe and we got down into the hole and continued digging by hand. There were pine boards. When we lifted up the first board, we could see an indentation of a skeletal form. It didn't take long to figure out that it was actual human remains.
Clearly in a state of disbelief, Sam promptly contacted the sheriff as well as the local coroner in order to conduct an official exhumation. To their shock and horror, most of the bones had decomposed into powder. However, 25 fragments remained, some of which were so fragile that they crumbled at the slightest touch. Not far from the initial grave, the group uncovered evidence of a second coffin, one that had yet to be disturbed by their exhumation efforts. Inside, 2 wedding rings were discovered on the frail index finger of the skeleton's exposed hand. It was at this point that the chilling realization of what they had stumbled upon left Judith both deeply disturbed and utterly horrified.
They handed me the rings, and it was sickening to think that I had desecrated somebody's grave.
Determined to rectify the situation, the Haneys set out to learn more about the individuals whose remains had been unearthed. Their investigation led them to a local resident named Jasper Norton, who, in turn, provided them with crucial information. Get this, years prior, Norton had excavated multiple graves in the area. He then revealed to the Haneys that their home, along with several others, were built atop an old African American cemetery known as Black Hope. This cemetery was the final resting place for many former slaves, with the last burial on record taking place in 1939. Beyond this, it is believed that as many as 60 individuals were laid to rest in paupers' graves. As they delved deeper, the Haneys discovered that the two individuals buried in their backyard were named Betty and Charlie Thomas, and they had passed away sometime during the 1930s. In an extraordinary act of respect, Judith and Sam Haney decided to rebury both Betty and Charlie in their yard, hoping that this gesture would allow the spirits to find peace. However, Judith would later recount that this desired tranquility was elusive, to say the least.
There was a clock in my bedroom, and one night, it started sparking and putting out a sort of blue glow.
When Judith inspected the clock, she was astonished to find that it was unplugged. That is certainly weird, and this peculiar incident would mark the beginning of the Haneys' descent into odd occurrences and disturbing experiences. One night, as Sam left for his night shift, Judith found herself alone in the house.
I heard the sliding glass door open, and I heard what I thought was Sam saying,
"What you doing?"
everything was quiet. The sliding glass doors were locked, and I thought, well, you must be losing your mind. This really must be getting to you. But, much to my amazement, that's not where the story ended. In the morning, I awoke, went in my closet to get my red shoes, and I could not find them anywhere.
When questioned about this, Sam would corroborate Judith's account by stating,
So, of course, I started looking for them and went through all of her closets where she normally put things, and we just couldn't find them. We had walked just a short distance from where the gravesites were, and I could see something on the grave, and they were both side by side, like someone had just picked them up and carried them over and laid them down on the graveside.
This discovery was unsettling, to say the least, and it became even more poignant when Sam realized it allegedly coincided with Betty Thomas's birthday.
And I kind of got the feeling that it was like Charlie was giving Betty a birthday present.
Judith, thinking long and hard about everything that had taken place thus far, beginning with her and Sam discovering the initial grave, felt as though she had pieced together the troubling occurrences.
I began to come to the realization that this was not all in my mind, and that this had to have some relationship to Betty and Charles's graves being disturbed. Their spirits were saying, this isn't right.
The Haneys weren't isolated in their experiences. A number of their neighbors also reported a number of strange happenings, including lights flickering, televisions turning on and off, faucets running spontaneously, and eerie sounds that sent chills down even the strongest spines. These events are definitely eerie, however, they would soon escalate into something far more sinister. Just like with the Haneys, Ben and Jean Williams had believed that they discovered their dream home when they moved into the same neighborhood. However, in a similar fashion, Jean quickly realized that something was off.
After we moved in, everything changed. When I tried to plant new plants, they would just not live no matter what I did. Fertilizer or whatever, they would still not live. And I constantly had a foreboding feeling. A feeling that things were not right, or something bad is about to happen.
The Williams, much like the Haneys, as well as several other residents in the area, noticed other alarming signs as well. Specifically, near their flower bed, sinkholes began appearing, resembling the shape of a coffin. Every time they would fill a hole, another one would inexplicably appear several days later. On top of this, the couple sensed an ominous presence encroaching on their once idyllic home, with dark shadows stretching across the walls, whispers echoing in the air, and a foul odor permeating the atmosphere. During this time, the Williams' granddaughter, named Carly, was also living in the home. On particularly sweltering Texas summer days, Carly would often claim that she'd randomly stumble into pockets of frigid air that left her both shaken and incredibly confused.
It would be very, very chilly, and you'd have this feeling of foreboding, or just, like something wasn't right. Anywhere in the house, you'd have a feeling that you were not alone. Somebody was watching you. It terrified me to be in the house by myself. The toilets used to flush on their own. As the water went down, I could hear, it was almost like conversations. You could hear people murmuring to themselves. It was a presence, or spirit, or something there. Something that wanted to be heard. Wanted me to know that it was there.
Jean Williams, in a similar fashion to Judith Haney, was confident that she knew exactly what the source of their troubles was.
I absolutely believe that all of these things happened to us because we were on the graveyard, and that we were simply going to be tormented until we left there.
Faced with escalating disturbances, Ben and Jean were shaken to their core, and as such, had many discussions about their next steps, with Ben recounting,
Me and Jean, we talked it over, and she said,
Well, what can we do? Walk off and leave it?
She said,
We ain't got enough money to pay down on another home.
I said, we've always been fighters. We're gonna stay right here and fight it and try to beat it.
Yeah, so remember how I mentioned that in many stories involving allegedly haunted properties, the family living in said property will often choose to soldier through the chaos because it's the least financially taxing thing to do? That comes into play here. Anyway, it wouldn't be long before Ben's noble determination was put to the test.
I came home from work around 10 after 12 from the midnight shift, and I walked straight to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door, and that's when I seen these two ghostly figures. And they went straight backwards into the den, and then they started heading right down the hall to Jean's, and it was standing right about 1.5 feet from the end of the bed. The only thing I really thought of was, they ain't messing with my wife. As I dove through it, I felt a sickly cold sensation in my body.
While Ben was desperate to fight and protect his family, Judith had experiences of her own, and those experiences took a very severe toll on her well-being.
I was crying all the time. I was frightened. I was scared of doing my daily routine in my own home.
Eventually, the Haneys decided to seek justice through the legal system. They filed a lawsuit against the builder for failing to disclose that their home had been constructed over a cemetery, hoping that in turn they could raise awareness about the situation within their subdivision. That's actually a really good idea. I don't know about you, but I know I would be pissed if I found out that my home was built on a long-forgotten graveyard, and that it may or may not be behind a number of disturbing paranormal experiences. Anyway, although a jury initially awarded them $142,000 for their anguish, the verdict was eventually overturned on legal grounds, stating that the developers bore no liability. Alright, I'm not a lawyer, but that's dumb. On top of this crushing verdict, the Haneys were left facing $50,000 in court costs. Sam would go on to reflect on the disastrous outcome of their battle.
At that point, we decided to file bankruptcy. All in all, we ended up losing the case, losing the money, losing the house.
Again, not a lawyer, but dumb. The Williams also considered taking legal action, but they were informed that without concrete evidence of a cemetery on their property, they had no recourse, possibly suffering a similar financial blow that had rocked the Haneys. With this information, and in a moment of frustration, Jean made a fateful decision, a decision that she would very quickly come to regret.
That was the last straw. You want a body? I'll show you a body. So I thought to myself, I can dig about 2 feet a day, and I knew I would reach a body.
However, as Jean began her excavation, she began to feel unwell, with her health rapidly deteriorating the longer she dug. It was then that her adult daughter Tina offered to step in and take over the digging. Much like with her mother, after just half an hour, Tina also started to feel ill. Carly was there to witness the incident, and she stated,
I remember her saying that she felt funny. She was getting dizzy as well. She put the shovel down, and she went back inside, and she just laid down on the couch. She's like, Mom, Daddy, I don't feel right. There's something wrong. The last thing I remember was her saying, Mommy, take care of my baby. Take care of my baby. And she looked so scared.
This turn of events had the Williams calling the paramedics, and while they awaited their arrival, Jean desperately tried to keep her daughter alert.
Almost immediately, her eyes started glazing over, and I was talking to her, trying to talk her out of dying. Please, Tina, talk to me. And all this time, her eyes were changing until they got to the point where I knew that she wasn't responding at all.
It would later be revealed that Tina suffered a catastrophic heart attack, tragically passing away 2 days after the incident. Overwhelmed with grief and racked with guilt over the loss of her daughter, Jean placed the blame squarely on herself.
I realized that I had desecrated another grave, and now I'm paying. I told Ben, we have to get out of here. It doesn't matter what we lose, what we had. And I knew that if we didn't, that I was not going to make it, because my fight was gone. I could fight no more.
In the end, the Williams fled to Montana before eventually returning to Texas, finding a new home and a fresh start. Today, they're a content family, free from the hauntings of their past, no longer tormented by strange sounds, ghostly apparitions, or heart-wrenching tragedies. In addition to this, in their former neighborhood, current residents report absolutely no paranormal disturbances. The mysteries surrounding the experiences of the Haneys and the Williams remain unsolved, leaving unanswered questions about the dark history that once shadowed their homes. Do you think the Black Hope curse is real? And if you don't, what do you think led to the odd occurrences, eerie experiences, as well as the tragedy that befell the Williams family? Story 3. The Demonic Bunk Bed. In the early days of February of 1987, Alan and Debbie Tallman made a seemingly innocent purchase, a bunk bed from a local secondhand store. After bringing it home, they assembled the bed in the basement of their house, opting to store it there for the time being. This nondescript, regular, ordinary bunk bed would remain in the basement for roughly 3 months, when it would eventually be moved upstairs. This act would mark the beginning of a harrowing saga that would last for 9 long months. From that moment onward, their home appeared to be plagued by malevolent spirits, or demonic entities, or some combination of the two, and it threw the Tallman family into the depths of sheer terror, with these paranormal entities first targeting their children, eventually ensnaring the entire family. Alright, I did get a little ahead of myself. That was a lot for the beginning of this story. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, when the bed first landed upstairs in the Tallman house. Prior to everything that would eventually unfold, it was known that the Tallman children had rarely experienced any sort of illness, be it serious or superficial. However, following the arrival of the bunk bed, they inexplicably fell ill with no clear explanation. Beyond this, on the very night they moved the bed upstairs, their son, concealing his identity under the pseudonym Danny, was in an adjacent room. After his parents tucked him in and bid him goodnight, he witnessed something kinda bizarre. His clock radio inexplicably turned on and began to switch channels on its own. Danny reported that he watched in disbelief as the radio's indicator moved without any assistance. Unfortunately, and likely to nobody's surprise, his parents dismissed his account, believing that he was simply imagining things. I don't think I'm alone in saying that this is how it always starts. So, listen to your kids, people of the internet. Anyway, as days turned into weeks, more strange occurrences unfolded. One day, Alan was engaged in painting the walls of the basement when he decided to take a break for lunch, leaving his paintbrush on a nearby table. You can probably guess where this is going. Upon returning, he was astonished to find that the paintbrush was inexplicably submerged in the paint bucket, with the bristles standing upright as if placed there deliberately. This was odd, to say the least, since everyone knows that's definitely not how paintbrushes work, and we can't definitively say that someone else in the family didn't submerge the brush as some sort of prank. Also, while the allegedly paranormal experiences until this point were seen as being more strange rather than unsettling, it wouldn't take long for the powers beyond to up the scare factor to frighteningly new heights. Their youngest daughter, while sleeping in the bunk bed, claimed to have seen a witch with glowing red eyes lurking just behind her door. While that is particularly terrifying, in an even more disturbing twist, she insisted that she witnessed flames flickering around her room. On top of this, just a month later, Danny echoed her claims, saying that he too had seen the same terrifying figure. Were they simply dreaming? I mean, probably. The fact that fire was allegedly seen accompanying the red-eyed witch leads me to believe that she was seen in a dream, because the smoke, heat, smell, and other fire-related things likely would have alerted at least one of the other family members that something was seriously wrong. I'm also not an expert, so what do I know? Anyway, concerned for their family's safety, Debbie and Alan sought the help of their local pastor, who, upon arriving to the house, claimed to have sensed an ominous, dark, deeply evil presence permeating their home. Despite the pastor passing through the home, the family continued to be relentlessly tormented by unseen entities. Doors would slam open and shut without cause. Eerie voices echoed throughout the halls, and ghostly apparitions materialized throughout the house. In a particularly chilling turn, and just a week before Christmas, Danny had his upcoming holiday completely ruined when he witnessed something so horrifying that it left him thoroughly disturbed, enough that he expressed his desperate desire to leave the house. Obviously frustrated by the ongoing turmoil, Alan decided to confront the spirits, defiantly shouting that they needed to cease tormenting his family and vacate his house immediately. In a move that solidified him as a man with a fresh pair of steel balls, he boldly declared that if they sought a fight, they could take it up with him directly. Listen, I've read enough stories and seen enough movies to know that evil spirits and demonic entities will absolutely call you on what I'm calling a bluff. So this act of defiance, the whole him challenging the supernatural forces to tussle with him head on, is brave and noble and shows the unconditional love Alan had for his family, but was also probably a really bad idea. Let's fast forward to the night of January the 7th, 1988. Around 2 a.m., Alan would get exactly what he wished for. He returned home from a late shift, only to be met with an unsettling howl emanating from outside the family's garage. Investigating the source of the noise, he was startled when a voice beckoned him, saying,
"Come here."
He then promptly rushed to the back of the house, searching for anyone who might be there, but ultimately found that he was alone. When he turned back toward the garage, he was horrified to discover it was completely engulfed in flames. Alan then rushed inside to retrieve a fire extinguisher, and he returned only to find that the fire had seemingly vanished without a trace. The garage door stood strong, completely intact, showing no signs of fire damage whatsoever. Okay, so remember how I said that the kids seeing the fire was likely them dreaming? Well, I can't really explain this one, unless Alan was suffering from some sort of sleep deprivation, possibly as a result of all that was happening to him and his family, leading to some sort of hallucination. I mean, either that, or ghosts are secretly pyromaniacs, and their fire, much like the ghosts themselves, are more spectral in nature, needing incredibly large amounts of energy to become tangible on our plane of existence. Once again, I'm not an expert. Anyway, as he stepped back inside the house, Alan reached for his lunch pail, only for it to be violently thrown across the room by an unseen force. Running out of options and feeling the desperate and urgent need to protect his family, Alan began sleeping in his daughter's room. One night, Alan found himself enveloped in a thick fog, and he heard a chilling voice emerge from the mist, declaring ominously,
"You're dead."
Obviously alarmed by this development, Debbie once again contacted the pastor, seeking guidance on what was happening and why. A few days later, while once again working late, Alan had reached out to a relative, requesting that they babysit his girls. I should point out that this relative was allegedly known to be quite the skeptic. Like, more of a skeptic than I am, and trust me when I say that this will become relevant very soon. That night, the same horrific figure, that grotesque, red-eyed witch that had terrified the children, also appeared before this relative, who, in turn, screamed with visceral terror. It was at this point that Debbie realized the true gravity of the situation and how they were up against dark, possibly demonic forces far beyond their comprehension. She then insisted that they gather the kids and leave the house for good. Two weeks later, before they could put their escape plan into effect, and in a desperate bid to reclaim their peace, Alan and Debbie had the bunk beds destroyed. Remarkably, after that, they experienced no further paranormal disturbances. In April of 1988, a new family moved into the Tallmans' former residence, and they too reported no witches, spectral fire, threatening voices, or any other sort of haunting incidents. That house, located in the small farming town of Horicon, Wisconsin, home to just 3,800 residents and known for its safety and prosperity, had no known history of hauntings prior to their experience. The Tallmans had moved into this home on April the 13th, 1986, with the alleged paranormal encounters beginning once they had moved the seemingly ordinary bunk beds upstairs more than a year later. So, was it the bunk bed? And if so, how did it come to possess these qualities? Was the wood used in some sort of profane ritual, leading to malevolent forces lining the grains of each plank? In the aftermath of their ordeal, the Tallman family found themselves under unwanted scrutiny. A man named Wayne Dobrins had visited them shortly after the strange events began, firmly believing that they were being targeted by a force completely demonic in nature. He was convinced that a sinister presence lurked within their home, and he found no evidence to suggest that the Tallmans were fabricating their experiences. Despite the unwanted attention, the family ultimately declined a lucrative offer from a tabloid to share their story, feeling it was wrong to profit from their children's misfortune. Instead, they agreed to tell their story to the producers of, you guessed it, Unsolved Mysteries. And they did so under very specific conditions, including their identities would be concealed during interviews. Their children would be referred to by pseudonyms, hence Danny, and actors would portray the family in all reenactments. I don't think I'm alone in saying, I think those are all fairly reasonable. Anyway, the haunting activity at the Tallman residence was further chronicled in the book Haunted America, written by Michael Norman and Beth Scott. However, in a surprising twist, during their research, they didn't connect the haunting to the bunk bed itself. Instead, they suggested that the disturbances might be linked to the property's location, which was said to sit near former Native American burial grounds. If that were truly the case, then why did the haunting and other paranormal shenanigans only begin after the Tallmans bought, built, and moved a random, unassuming bunk bed, with those same paranormal shenanigans stopping in their entirety when that same bunk bed became friends with a wood chipper? In any event, this chilling history added another layer of complexity to the Tallman family's harrowing experiences, leaving lingering questions about the true nature of the forces that had invaded their once peaceful home. So, what do you think? Did an evil spirit or something demonic attach itself to an ordinary bunk bed? Or was something else behind the odd, often terrifying experiences the Tallman family endured? Thank you so much for tuning in to the very first Matt's Mysteries Halloween special. If you like this format, where I cover multiple mysteries in an episode in a more bite-sized way, be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'll shake my content up with more videos like this in the future. If you like what I do and want to support me in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my goal to reach 500 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we might be able to pull it off. If there's a mystery you'd like me to cover, don't hesitate to drop me a comment or send an email to mattsmysterystories@gmail.com. I try my best to read every comment, and your recommendations might just be the next mystery I dive into. Anyway, until the next one, I hope you have a very happy, safe, spooky, and candy-infested Halloween.